Hello everyone, my name is Paul Cohen, I'm a compositor. Um, Thanks for tuning into this live stream. Hopefully the tech is running. Um, okay, so this is a continuation of a conversation I had live streamed a couple of weeks ago now. Sorry for my lack of being putting more stuff out there, but anyway, so we were looking at this guy. And it was essentially talking about plate analysis and just the interest in cars because they're part of the wider thing of vehicles, which we deal with in visual effects a lot. And they're just really interesting from a lighting perspective, and just really interesting to look at because we work with cars a lot. And a lot of what I rambled on about last time was what do we notice? What does the eye see? What do we notice? We notice stuff because it's novel. When you look at a car, you don't notice a whole bunch of stuff about lighting and shadows and reflections and all this sort of stuff. You don't notice it because you see it every day, right? But to be a successful compositor, if you're working with photoreality, you need to be aware of what we do and don't notice. So it helps to be looking at the things that we see all the time. You have to try to bring novelty back into everything we do, because novelty is what switches our brains on and says pay attention. When we see stuff that we see every day, our brains don't switch on to it, our brains don't pay attention. And what we pay attention to and what we notice and what we don't pay attention to and what we don't notice is a big part of being a compositor, figuring out how to make something look real. What does real look like? What can I get away without fixing? What do I have to remove? What do I have to repair? How can I make this look more real? Anyway, which is obviously something that occupies me quite a lot. So trying to get past, trying to look at things new with a fresh eye, it will help you become more effective. So this is following on from this guy. This was a car we were looking at last time, which is just a random car that I liked the look of when I saw it in a car park. You know, there was a lot of work. Cars were very much a focus for a long time in visual effects, in terms of they were used for a lot of early surfacing. The car industry spent a lot of money on advertising. They're big ticket items. If you can sell a few more cars a month, then you'll be very successful. You'll make a lot of money. So there was a lot of money essentially poured into research and development, especially in the 90s, which is where they really came into their own. And now the vast majority of any commercials you see, if you see a commercial for a new car and it's like driving through the wilderness and looking really cool, and then there's some close-ups of them going through water or whatever it is, about 50 to 75% of those shots are entirely synthetic. Some of them are drone shots and helicopter shots, and they're just enhanced with visual effects, but you see a lot of computer-generated vehicles. Anyway, so you spend a lot of time working on vehicles, talking about car ads and showing some examples of what really goes into them as a topic for another time. But for right now, this is really just about trying to bring across what it is that I'm looking for, or at least just, you know, if you can bring in this sense of being able to break things down and looking at plates and understanding them, then that will help you in your work. So this is the one we looked at last time. This is a classic example of direct lighting. Okay, this car is in the sun. Okay, so we can see direct flares coming off the sun on all of the curved surfaces. You've got a nice flare that runs along the bottom down here. It's got a bit of a couple of artifacts there that are quite cool. And in general, it's in the sun. Okay, so you get this strong sense of shadow, strong senses of shadows underneath the vehicle. This line here. This second car is in direct lighting. Okay, so it's actually all in shadow, and this is just another. No one ran out and punched me while I was shooting this car. There's no identifying marks, so we should be okay. But this, as opposed to this, so this is in the sun, this is actually in the shade. So you can see you don't have a strong line of shadow, right? Whereas here you do. Okay, so that's in the sun, that's not in. So this is a classic case of indirect lighting, right? You've got, it's under a big awning in a car wash, okay? And you can see the awning's reflection on the windscreen there. So this is the roof, this is the sky, essentially. You can see that the outside is daylit, okay? And then here's the shadow of the awning. This car's in shadow, this car's in shadow. Okay. And you can see that without the direct lighting of the sun, first of all, your dynamic range feels a lot stronger. Like this has the same dynamic range. Yes, if you're looking across it, what's my deepest, what's my brightest, and all shades in between. But this doesn't look as pretty, quote unquote, as this does, right? I feel it because it's more defined by its reflection. So you've got the sky, you've got clouds. This is an extension to the awning. This is clouds underneath it as well. This is ground, part of the car park. And then you can see me walking. This is my bald head, right, reflecting the sun as well. And you'll actually see some reflections of me here on the fender. That isn't too much of a problem. You may or may not have to take that out depending on how keen the visual effects supervisor is. But anyway, it's a really nice example of the difference between a direct lighting scenario and an indirect lighting scenario. Right now, sunlight is very harsh, right? It brings in a really strong sense of contrast, and sometimes you like that, sometimes you don't like that. When you do photo, that's why they tend to do photo shoots and any beauty shoots, portrait shots, headshots. If I'm a photographer and I want to make a model look good, or I want to make a dress look good, I'm going to shoot them in controlled lighting, which is generally speaking not outside. And if you see someone doing a shoot outside, you'll see some guy standing just out of camera with this huge reflecting, like a big reflecting sheet that's reflecting sun onto the fill side, to reduce the sense of contrast on the subject, right? A lot of the time you want to be able to control it. Light, but the thing about the sun is it's very hard to control. You can cover it up, but it's very hard to get rid of it. So this is a nice example of something that's much more defined by its reflections. It's also more defined by its reflections than it is from its surface, and it's defined by its reflection much more than the direct sun here. Okay, so if I'm looking at this car, I'm seeing that this red, obviously I can't see a lot of influence from the colour of the environment. I can along here, right, the blue sky, the line of the blue sky, and a little bit of the blue sky in here. But this actually blue is from the sign reflection, whereas if I look here, I'm getting this really nice tones of blue all the way along this silver. So this silver car is consistently silver all along. You're starting to get this really nice sense of saturation from the sky. Okay. This is reflection of the ground. Obviously you can see witch's hat here, which is a single witch's hat that's been split in the reflection, right? And just the harshness of shadow. You can see that's the softness of this line. And again, if you were compositing into a particular shot that had this lighting scenario, you'd be attempting to match this. You would have lighting passes from your lighting department, depending on your lighting department. It may or may not match the plate particularly well in terms of softness and how it falls away from the wheel and how it contacts the ground and all this sort of stuff. Spent a lot of time looking and working with shadows in comp. And obviously this is a very different scenario to the shadow here. Right, you can still see this contribution of occlusion as we work our way away from the wheel. Right, that is essentially produced by the same thing as that, but you don't notice this drop off, this soft line here as much because your brain is screaming this into your face really, really loudly. Okay, because that's so much more noticeable. Now, if this was on a character, if this was on a foreground character, and I'll show some examples of this next time I talk about it, they generally look pretty awful. If you're lighting people, you don't want these kinds of strong lighting because it makes things look quote unquote unattractive, right? And we've been conditioned for a long time to find a particular type of look in terms of lighting beautiful or pretty, and there's a lot of time in commercials and photo shoots and everything spent making sure that things are presented in a way that will be as pretty or beautiful as possible. And that's definitely a conversation for another time. I won't get into that now because I'm already running over. Anyway, in terms of just analysing, well, what do we see from this plate? Now, I've just put a quick stabilisation together, which is a bit ugly, but it'll give you an idea of, so I'm just stabilising around here. It's just a straight 2D track. So this is really just, you can throw very quick stabilisations in when looking at plates just to lock something down because it literally only takes you a minute to do, and you can use it to show things that may not be necessarily visible when you're looking at something like this. Right, so if I'm looking at the stabiliser version, I can see the reflection of me here. My actual more visible reflection will come in here, And just the way that these surfaces move, I love it because it's not a flat surface, right? So if you're doing something in 2D, the majority of stuff in Nuke, this tracker is a good example. It starts off in 2 dimensions. It's flat, right? And that's very, very useful for a lot of things. But there's a lot of things that it's not useful for. At least there's a lot of things where the world doesn't look flat, and cars don't look flat, and reflections don't move in a flat way. Anyway, so I love the way that these things curl over, which accentuates the shape of the car. Lighting is all about providing shape to something, whether it's computer-generated lighting or whether you're a DOP running around on set trying to make your car look as beautiful as possible, or you're choosing what time of day you're going to shoot it, or you're choosing what lens to shoot it with. All of these things have to do with accentuating the shape of what it is that you're trying to display, whether it's a person or a vehicle or anything else. Anyway, I just wanted to point out a few things. So I'll talk at a later stage about. I'm not a lighter. I haven't done a lot of, but I've worked with a huge amount of lighting. And again, there's so many different coatings on cars, and there's a subsurface element to it. And you have all of the reflections from the glass, and you've got reflections of shadows, and you've got shadows of reflections, and all this good stuff here. But I'll talk into that more detail at a later stage. But it's just pretty cool. Like if you can kind of see these sorts of things and just appreciate just the complexity of what goes into you know, they call it the God renderer. It's like the complexity of reality is really quite fascinating. And if you're in the industry of trying to simulate reality, the first thing that you have to do is have a pretty healthy respect for just how complex lighting can be and what the different contributions are and how that changes how we perceive something. It's all about perceiving it. Can I create a mood? Can I make someone want to buy this car? Can I make someone scared of this spaceship? Can I make someone really pay attention to whatever's jumped into frame? You know, it's about evoking emotion. And obviously lighting, because lighting controls how things look, that really is integral to everything that we do. Just a couple of little points about this guy, because there were a few things that I ran out of time for or I didn't think of to talk about when I was looking at this one, just in terms of a few little other points in terms of just straight plate analysis, right? We talked before about how you can see these flares. We've got a couple of flares here that are essentially all that's happening is the sun is reflecting directly off that and it's so bright that it's blowing out the optics in the lens. And you can actually see some ghosts here, right? So these shapes here are diametrical reflections of these, right? So you can see the way that they move. They move differently from the way the plate moves, okay? They move the opposite, right? Because they're reflecting around the center of the lens. It's similar to reflections. Reflections move differently from the camera, right? They move different, even though the glass is embedded in the car, it's moving the same way as the rest of the car. The reflections, because of the way the light is working, gives you that sense of parallax, and all of that's important for our sense of reality. You walk past a car like this, you won't notice, oh man, look at the way that reflection is parallaxing because it's actually something that's behind me as opposed to something that's in front of me. You know, you don't notice those things. If you can bring that novelty back and you can appreciate that and just be aware that it's there, then it's far easier for you to bring that into your work. Okay, and like I've said a few times, it's all about how can we make our shots better, how can we improve things, how can we blow the client away, how can we satisfy our own sense of creativity and happiness with our work. Okay, and so you can see there's these little reflections here. There's a couple down here. They're reflections off the top. They're like mirror flares. But this guy doesn't actually have, there's nothing that's over here that's a reflection. I think there's a little bit just in here actually that's coming from there. Okay. One other thing that I found really, really interesting was just the way the light falls away, the shadow falls away from this rear vision mirror. So let's just think about that for a second in terms of the contribution of light. Okay. Because it took me a while to figure out what's going on here. I thought, wow, this is the shadow. So this is directly in sun. This surface is pointing directly at the sun. This is the sun directly on this here, but not on this side. So this is the shadow of this from that light from the sun. So why does it drop away? Okay, and part of it is it drops away because of the fact that the curve of the door is continuing, but it's not that much stronger here than it is there. Like, right? The reason that it's dropping away is because that down here this door is a lot more defined by the reflection, right? You can see the cobblestones on the ground. This is one of these things that says don't crash into this with your car, which is what I'm always crashing into. It drives my wife mad. So this is a big blocker on the ground that's conveniently painted yellow, shadows of other cars and so on. So you can kind of see that that's the reflection of the environment. Okay, and it really is defined in the bottom part of this door, right? The lighting contribution of this door is basically the surface that the door is made of, which is red, but mainly the reflection of the ground. Whereas up here, it's not mainly about the reflection of the ground. Up here, this is the reflection of the sky. Okay, this is a reflection of a background car, a couple of trees, sky, right? So then all of a sudden, there's no sky here. There's no brightness, luminance to contribute to that in terms of lighting. Okay, and then as it falls away, it's like as it falls away, the door is becoming more driven by the reflections that are coming from the secondary reflections than it is by the direct lighting. Okay, so this is why it's always a challenge to be working with stuff that's in direct daylight. At least you just need to be aware of it. This ground, right, which is the same as this. Okay, that's this, right? But it's the part of that that's behind me. And this is bright. Like, this is really bright. This is way brighter in terms of luminance than any of the surfacing on the underside of this door, on the bottom half of the door. Okay, and so what you have is essentially you've got something that it's not the sun, but it's lit by the sun. It's really bright, and it's blowing out. At least it's primarily driving the look of this part of the door. And then as you get to the top, you're getting stuff that's now much more defined by the strength of what's coming from the sky. This is from the sun and the sky. This is just from the sky, right? And then this is the sun is shadowed. So there's sky reflection in here as well. But it's other parts of the environment. This is the sky with a cloud, but there's no sun because the sun's directly behind this. So this is just a really, I like this example of saying if you were getting lighting passes from your lighting department, this is something that may or may not be particularly present in what you see. It should be there. If you're getting a full AAV set, you should have passes that will let you work with this, but depending on the kind of facility you're working at, or whether you're working with a facility at all, you may not actually be able to get that into your lighting. It depends on the complexity of the rig that's been used to put these elements together. If I was getting elements rendered similar to this, if I had another car that was going behind this, or I had something that I was bringing in from another shoot, or something that I was putting in, I'd have to be aware of the way that this lighting is working. And I just thought it was really, a really nice example. It may not be in the perfect mathematics that comes out of a renderer, depending on just so many different factors, but it should be there. And so if you were to see this, you'd think, wow, why is it dropping away? It helps to be aware of it's because the strength of the reflections from the ground, because the ground is so luminant and so bright, that is a primary contributor to the colour of this car. You've got the underlying red of the actual door, but then you have the environmental reflections that are really driving that. So this is just that particular, the way that this softly drops off, I just thought was really interesting. Yeah, so look, so that's the kind of stuff that we jump onto. There's other stuff about parallaxing reflections. I can always chat about that next time. I did do a quick stabilisation of this guy. One thing that is interesting is if you go for, like when you look at that stabilisation, it's not the world's greatest stabilisation, but it does kind of show you how the perspective is changing. But if you see before and after, first frame, last frame, you're seeing a much greater difference in terms of the perspective on the mirror. Okay. So I just thought that was interesting. And when you look at the sides of the plates, you're getting, if I look at first frame, last frame, or if I look at it running, you're starting to see just the classic limitations of working with 2D. I'm going to have a go at stabilising this properly, or doing a better job of it, and that may lead into a discussion about some of the limitations of using 2D tracking. But anyway, so yeah, look, I just thought that was pretty cool. I actually sat down and spent some time looking at this guy. So this is just a quick stabilisation as well around one of the handles. And you can see once the plate's stabilised, you're getting a much stronger sense of how those flares are bouncing around and just what they're doing to the lens. Anyway, so, I've been thinking a lot about novelty, obviously, and that's novelty is, I think, the correct term for it. And it's just that sense of trying to break out of what we see every day, because if you're working with stuff that we see every day, And this is something that will happen if you're a career compositor and you're doing this for 5 or 15 or 20 years. Then in the same way that you're watching the same shot over and over and over again, and you watch the same frames over and over and over again, and you can just spend weeks or sometimes even months working on the same sequence of images. It's very hard. You have to break yourself out of the fact that you have seen the same thing over and over. And so I try to practice that in daily life, just whenever I'm waiting for something, or I'm a bit bored, or I'm kind of sitting in the car, or I'm walking past a car, and just to look and really appreciate how the different lights, like the different contributions to the environment, how much is environment, how much is not, why does it look the way it was, what is it about that car that I do not even notice because I've seen it 1,000 times and my brain tells me it's real. We're in the market of making stuff look real. What does real look like? That's what it's all about. Anyway, thanks for listening to me rave. I hope I haven't repeated myself too much. I really appreciate everyone who's watching these live streams. Thanks very much, and I'll see you again soon. My name's Paul Cohen. Bye.